Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I'm Mike Brown.
And I'm Matthew.
You are, and I'm so glad of that you are Matthew. You are the best Matthew I know.
Am I the only Matthew with one T that you know?
Yes. Yes, so you are the best Matthew with one T who I know. You are definitely a good egg, Matthew. There's no question.
I don't really try, but thank you.
That, I think therein lies, it's not about trying, it's about being, You be yourself into good eggery.
I try to be a bad egg, but it doesn't work.
Right. You like to be a bit of a contrarian sometimes.
Yeah, I'd like to try to correct people.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a very sad story today.
It is a very sad story.
It's local, and it was a terrible, terrible time.
And we will have a guy who I grew up with. He's now in crisis communication, and his name is Tim Conrad, and Butterfly Effect Communications is his company. So if you ever need crisis communications for any reason, look up Tim Conrad. He's a good guy. You'll hear him.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Our content is often intense, and some listeners may find it disturbing. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We are ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
On June 29, 2021, the town of Lytton, British Columbia recorded a temperature of 49.6 degrees Celsius. That's the highest air temperature ever recorded in Canadian history. The next day, the town burned to the ground. The fire was reported at 4:38 in the afternoon. The evacuation order came at 6 p.m. By 7:30, most of the structures in Lytton and the adjacent First Nations reserves had been destroyed or were actively burning. 2 people did not get out. Nearly 4 years later, the cause of the fire has never been formally determined. A class action lawsuit is working its way through the BC Supreme Court, and Lytton, a community of 210 people, at the confluence of the Fraser and Thompson Rivers, a place the Inklakatma people have called home for 10,000 years, is rebuilding. You're listening to Dark Poutine, episode 426, Wildfire, the day Lytton burned. The Inklakatma name for the place where Lytton stands is Tilkemptson. It means confluence. the meeting point of the Fraser and the Thompson Rivers, two of British Columbia's most powerful waterways coming together in a steep canyon about 260 kilometers northeast of Vancouver. Chief Spintlum, speaking at the time of the gold rush, described this site as the center of the Inklakatma homeland, and they have lived along these rivers for approximately 10,000 years. After colonization, the federal government divided the Inklakatma into roughly 15 bands, and the Lytton First Nation was among them. The land kept its power regardless. For the purposes of this story, Lytton is actually three separate communities sharing the same canyon bench. The Village of Lytton, a municipality of about 210 people, sat on a raised flat above the confluence. Just to the north, sharing the same bench, was the Clickamcheen Indian Reserve, or IR-18. They were a Lytton community of about 35 homes and buildings. About 500 meters to the east, up the slope across the Trans-Canada Highway, was the Clackamich Indian Reserve, IR-17, with 16 homes. Together, these three communities had close to 180 buildings and a population that, when you count the surrounding area, reached into the thousands. On Main Street stood the Lytton Chinese History Museum, a monument to the Chinese laborers who had built the CPR main line through the Fraser Canyon in the 1880s. It housed 1,600 artifacts, a library, and an archive. There was no other place like it. The building sat about 50 meters from the CN rail line. Both the CN and CP railways run mainline tracks through the Fraser Canyon, carrying goods from the Port of Vancouver east across the country. The trains run constantly, all day, all night, loaded and heavy. Locals had grown up alongside them. Train-related fires along the canyon corridor were not unusual. In previous years, the railways had used water cars to douse the trackside vegetation as trains passed through. By the summer of 2021, that practice had stopped. But in late June 2021, no one was thinking about trains. They were thinking about the heat. The 2021 Western North American Heat Dome was one of the deadliest climate events in Canadian history and one of the most under-remembered. A high-pressure system settled over British Columbia like a lid and held. For 5 days before the fire, Lytton's daily highs climbed past 40 degrees, then 43, then 47.9, then on June 29th, 49.6 degrees Celsius, the highest air temperature ever recorded anywhere in Canada. Lytton was, for one afternoon, hotter than Kuwait City, hotter than Baghdad, the hottest inhabited place on Earth. Across Metro Vancouver alone, 619 people died in that heat wave. Most were elderly, most were alone, and most had no air conditioning. They died in apartments and care homes quietly while the country was barely paying attention. According to Aon's catastrophe analysis, the heat wave killed more than 808 people across Canada. The national drought that accompanied it cost the Canadian economy more than $2.5 billion.
You know, there's something deeply revealing, I think, about how the kinds of deaths that society turns into national trauma and versus the kind that it sort of almost absorbs silently. You know, hundreds of people dying alone in overheated apartments should have permanently changed how the country thinks about climate and infrastructure and aging. Instead, for a lot of people, the heat dome became sort of almost background noise immediately. Not because it wasn't catastrophic, but because the victims were largely invisible before they died, right?
I live in a building that was being built at the time of the heat dome, and there is not air conditioning in this building. Most buildings are built now with some form of air conditioning in it.
There's no aircon in my building.
Well, your building's a bit older, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, your building's like 8 million years old. It's like this. It's the monolith from 2001.
I think it was early 90s, I think my building is.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty old. That's well before the heat dome days, anyway. We have seen different regions react in that way. In Nova Scotia, for example, I know that there were a lot of apartment buildings that were given subsidies to upgrade every apartment to have like a mini split or something like that to a heat exchanger at the very least. It's better for the environment. It's better energy-wise, actually, to have a heat exchanger than to use your baseboard heat, for example. So
we should have like a June, instead of toys for tots at Christmas, we should have air cons for elders drive.
yeah, we'll start that up, Matthew.
Air cons for elders.
That sounds like a nonprofit that we could definitely get behind. The spring had delivered barely 5% of Lytton's average rainfall since April. June brought just 0.8 millimeters. The grass covering the canyon slopes was brown and cured. The needle litter under the ponderosa pines was bone dry. Everything that could burn would. That afternoon, the wind was already moving up the canyon from the south, channeled and accelerated by the terrain, gusting to 50 kilometers per hour and beyond. With the temperature approaching the record set the day before and relative humidity below 15%. At 4:38, a wildfire was reported just south of the village. What destroyed Lytton was a surface fire, dead grass, dry shrubs, and accumulated pine needle litter along the ground. The tree canopies around the community survived almost entirely intact. Aerial photos taken shortly after the fire show green crowns standing over the blackened ruins. The forest lived, but the town did not. The fire started in a small drainage basin near the CN rail line south-southwest of the village. From there, it split into 4 simultaneous paths, each racing toward a different edge of 3 communities. Scientists from FireSmart BC and the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction spent 5 days on site in August 2021, working from aerial photos, burn patterns, and eyewitness accounts. Their analysis put the speed of the fire on the grass-covered slopes at up to 230 meters per minute. The most direct path into the southern edge of the village of Lytton covered 150 meters. The fire crossed it in under a minute. Within 40 minutes of the fire being reported, it had reached the boundaries of the village of Lytton, IR-18 and IR-17. All 3 communities almost simultaneously before a single fire engine could be effectively positioned. Volunteer firefighters arrived at a situation already beyond any realistic containment. RCMP officers began going door to door telling people to get out. Mayor Jan Polderman issued the formal evacuation order at 6 p.m., 82 minutes after the first report. The town was already on fire. Lytton First Nation councillor Niakia Hanna lost cell service about 10 minutes into the evacuation. He would later describe those first minutes on the ground. Quote, "Everybody stepped up in the entire community, and we went door to door and house to house, picking up people everywhere to get them to the outskirts of the village. People were just moving, and everybody was helping." End quote. The FireSmart researchers concluded that no realistic initial attack response could have succeeded. The Lytton wildfire belonged to that narrow category, somewhere between 2 and 5%, of wildfires that cannot be stopped once they are moving. That proportion has not changed in decades, regardless of how much firefighting technology has improved. At 6 p.m., 82 minutes after the fire was first reported, BC Wildfire Service pilots took aerial reconnaissance photos of Lytton. The surrounding wildland fuel was already ash, the grass was gone, the needle litter was burned out, there was no active wildfire anywhere near the community, and yet more than 20 homes and buildings were fully engulfed in flames, burning simultaneously across all 3 communities, with no live wildfire adjacent to any of them. The wildfire had done its job and left. What was destroying Lytton now was Lytton itself.
Yeah, and that, what you just said there, changes the entire way you think about wildfire, right? Most of us imagine some giant wall of flame from the forest swallowing a whole town, but increasingly these disasters are not, less about the forest in some ways, but more about the systems we built inside it. So if you think of, the sheds and the vents and the fences and, the way one structure quietly becomes fuel for the next structure in a town. And it's unsettling because it means that the danger isn't just nature, especially now that we're having more and more of these events. Part of it is the design of towns.
Totally.
And part of it is policy. And part of it is how cheaply and quickly North America spent decades building communities in places that were always going to burn eventually. And look at suburbs that are built constantly in floodplains as well, right? Floodplains are going to flood and burn areas are going to burn, right?
It's true. It reminds me of the Grenfell fire that I wrote about in my book. Policy and design is what killed all those people just so somebody could save a pound or two. The Fire Smart research team developed a concept to explain how this happens. They call it the home ignition zone, the 30-meter circle of vulnerability around every structure. Science has shown that during extreme wildfires, fires within 30 meters of buildings can cause massive damage. An ember lands on a wooden deck, sparks find the gap under a shingle. A shed full of firewood catches fire and becomes a furnace 3 meters from the bedroom window. That shed then ignites the house. The house sends thousands of embers into the air into the next block, and the community burns itself building by building, street by street for hours after the wildfire has passed through and moved on. In Lytton, the conditions for exactly this were everywhere. Homes and lots were dense. Sheds, garages, and workshops sat 2 to 5 meters from the main house. Wood fences ran to property boundaries where dry, dead vegetation met more dry, dead vegetation. The Main Street business district was old wood construction buildings sharing walls. By 6 p.m., with more than 20 homes and businesses on fire simultaneously, stopping the fires would have required roughly 60 fire engines on scene. The Fire Smart report was blunt. A successful response was not possible. By 7:30 p.m., most of the buildings in the Village of Lytton, IR-18, and the 5 homes in IR-17 had been totally destroyed or were actively burning. The wildfire had not returned. Lytton had burned itself down in approximately 2 hours. 2 people died in the Lytton fire. Their deaths were confirmed by the BC Coroner's Service on July 3rd, 3 days after. Jeanette and Michael Chapman were in their 60s. They had lived in Lytton their whole lives. On the afternoon of June 30th, they were on their property with their son Jeff getting ready for a late barbecue when Jeff spotted smoke down the hill. It happened so fast, Jeff Chapman told CBC News. From the time I seen smoke and the time the fire came up, I don't think it was 10 minutes before the house was on fire. At first, none of them fully understood what was coming. They searched for a fire extinguisher. They thought it might be a grass fire they could knock down themselves. Then the shed caught. Then the house started to go. Jeff helped his mother, Jeanette, into a trench on the property, a pit dug to repair the septic system. His father, Mike, a retired mechanic, climbed in beside her. Jeff pulled plywood over the top of them. It was really only enough room for them, he said. I was so hot, I didn't know what to do. I just ran. There was nowhere to run to. He made it to the nearby railway tracks and lay face down on the gravel for 45 minutes, covering his head against the heat as the fire moved through. That's when the power line came down. It pulled out of the house and fell directly across the trench. Quote, I knew my parents were in that hole, Chapman said, and I'm watching the house burn and I'm thinking, oh my God, the power line pulled right out of the house and it came down right on my parents, end quote. He lay on the railway gravel, barely able to breathe, certain the fire would take him next. It didn't. When the flames died down enough for him to move, he made his way back to the property. I wish I didn't, he said. I seen my mom and dad's remains burned, end quote. He recorded a video on his phone while he was still on the tracks, saying where his parents were, fearing the worst. He can be heard sobbing, I lost my mom and dad. Adding insult to injury, the Chapman's home was not insured against fire. A year later, Jeff Chapman told CTV News, quote, "I wake up in the middle of the night and I see my mother's face. The sound of fire just totally brings me right back to that day," end quote. Jeff said he blamed himself. He also said despite everything, he wanted to go back. Down the driveway of the fire-ravaged property, there is a memorial to his parents. He brings flowers every time he returns. "Dad was my mentor," he said. "He was everything to me," end quote. "We were just trying to save what we worked our whole lives for," he told CBC a day after the fire. "It might not have been the best, but it was home," end quote. Ross Urquhart had lived in Lytton for 50 years. He and his wife Judith were among the first to eventually rebuild. He described the evacuation plainly. "All the homes around us were burning, and we just had to jump in the vehicle and get out." His wife Judith later described the community as being scattered, in her words, to the winds. Writer and playwright Kevin Loring grew up in Lytton, with family roots in both the Lytton First Nation going back to time immemorial and in settler roots dating back to the 1880s. He returned every summer with his wife and children. Afterward, he wrote, quote, "On June 30th, 2021, a wildfire ripped through Lytton, BC. I lost my hometown that day," end quote. Megan Fandrich's house survived. Helicopters dropping water saved it. Her coffee shop burned. Everything that formed the structure of her daily life was gone. Quote, "I lost my community. Everything that was normal in my life was suddenly gone. My house is on the north bank of Lytton, and the wind blew the fire south. People tell me I was lucky, and I understand why they say that, because my house was saved, but I don't feel lucky," end quote. It would take her close to a year to begin processing what had happened. When another wildfire broke out near Lytton the following summer, she called her father, then in his 70s, who had previously said he felt fine. He was sitting in his chair watching the flames across the river. Quote, "He was saying he felt his heart was acting up a bit," she said. "I feel the burden of what he had been through, and seeing another fire affected him to the extent that he had a heart attack," end quote. The evacuees fanned out across the BC interior. Kamloops, Merritt, Lillooet, Cache Creek, driving through smoke on highways closed to non-evacuees. The Kamloops First Nation opened their powwow grounds to help house Lytton evacuees. The Lytton First Nation eventually built a tiny home village on the old St. George's residential school site. Councillor John Haugen and all 4 of his siblings lost their homes that day. Speaking from Merritt weeks later, he said, quote, "In the short term, we're going to be displaced. We're going to be having to make a lot of decisions about how to go forward as a strong community and as a strong nation." Everyone who made it out had the same question. How did this start? The fire began near the CN rail line just south of the village. Several residents say they saw sparks from a passing train. Chief Matt Pascoe didn't mince words. Quote, "There are a lot of fires in the canyon caused by rail service," end quote. CN denied any connection. The Transportation Safety Board investigated and in October 2021 found no evidence tying the fire to rail activity. By 2023, the RCMP called the cause likely human. By 2024, they closed the file with no cause determined and no charges laid. In 2024, the BC Supreme Court certified a class action lawsuit claiming a train started the fire. The case is still before the courts. A trial is supposed to take place in 2027. 2 people are dead, a town was destroyed, and the cause remains officially unknown. We'll be back after a quick break. And we are back at the halfway point with Matthew grumping about people. What do you think so far, Matthew?
Yeah, I think what stays with me about this is the speed of it. Not just physically, but psychologically.
Totally. You don't have time to prepare for it in your own mind, let alone physically. Yeah.
The whole town effectively ceased to exist between dinner time and sunset.
Crazy.
And human beings are not built to emotionally process that kind of scale and at that kind of speed. One minute you're deciding what to barbecue, the next minute you're lying face down on a railway while your parents burn to death 30 feet away. And there's no narrative arc there. There's no time for the brain to catch up. It's just rupture, right? And I think that's part of why disasters like this leave such a strange scar afterwards. Survivors often talk about guilt and confusion and disorientation because the mind keeps trying to impose logic onto something that behaved more like an ambush. And there's another layer to this story that feels very of today for me as well. It's, this town burned during the hottest temperature ever recorded in Canadian history. Yeah. And we know the conditions that created it. And we know extreme heat and wildfire risk is increasing. And we know small communities are vulnerable. And we also know that infrastructure and emergency systems are lagging behind the reality we've entered. Yeah. And even now, years later, there's still this cultural instinct to treat these events like freak exceptions instead of previews, right? Right. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all, because historically societies are very good at rebuilding after disasters, but what societies struggle with is accepting that the disaster is no longer an anomaly, right? Right. So that's what sticks with me with this so far.
Once disaster becomes the norm and we become accustomed to it.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck?
But we're not planning for it. So
no. The fire lasted 2 hours. The recovery has lasted years. In fact, it's become its own disaster. By March 2026, Auditor General Bridget Parrish released an uncomfortable examination of the province's role. At the time of the fire, the Village of Lytton employed 6 people, a chief administrative officer, a couple of clerks, and some public works staff. No engineers, no planners, no recovery manager. Every bylaw and building permit in the village's history burned along with the backup server. The ground itself was contaminated. More than 50,000 tons of debris and soil laced with asbestos, lead, and heavy metals had to be dug up and hauled away before anyone could pour a foundation to get rebuilding started. That alone would have overwhelmed any small town office. But underneath the contamination literally sat another layer of complexity. 6 unknown Inklakatma archaeological sites within the village. Provincial law required monitoring before any of that soil could move. Not negotiable, not optional. The province stepped in with $61.6 million committed to funding, but treated the recovery as community-led, its own role limited to support, not leadership. By 2023, an outside accounting firm reviewing the spending found contracts missing and records incomplete and concluded the village, quote, lacked the leadership and governance capacity to manage such substantive and complex contracts, end quote. A 6-person office built for noise complaints and parks maintenance had been handed the most complex recovery challenge in BC history, with no framework, no experienced staff, and almost no money of its own. The same gap came up again with the Inklakatma. They held Aboriginal title and rights across the territory, and provincial legislation passed in 2019 had affirmed their right to participate in decisions over their own land. But the emergency management law in force at the time of the fire said nothing about Indigenous peoples in a disaster response. There was no structure for a genuine partnership, and the province never built one. The archaeology work became a flashpoint where that absence was felt hardest. Residents grew furious at the delays and the cost. Some questioned the Indigenous-owned archaeology company over conflict of interest. Media coverage blamed the archaeology itself for holding up the rebuild rather than the lack of plan to manage it. With no province-led framework to fall back on, the Tribal Council was left to defend legally required work to an angry community. The Auditor General's report put it plainly. Tribal Council representatives said they were left to justify the protection of archaeology sites despite provincially legislated requirements. The archaeologists doing the work protecting their ancestors faced hostility and racism on the job site. New legislations passed in November 2023 finally addressed much of this. collaborative recovery frameworks, Indigenous partnership requirements, recovery powers for small municipalities. Good legislation, but years too late for Lytton. The first building permit wasn't issued until October 2023, more than 2 years after the fire. By early 2026, roughly 20 homes had been rebuilt and occupied in a village that once had more than 100. Councillor John Haugen said it best in July 2021 while the ruins were still warm. Quote, "You can't just be dismissive of science and weather." The country heard him and moved on. The Auditor General's 2026 report closed with a warning. Across North America, wildfires, extreme heat events, and floods are getting more frequent and more severe. It is likely, she concluded, that at least one of BC's 29 small municipalities, communities with fewer than 1,000 people, will experience a catastrophic event requiring recovery support from the province. One of 29. Those are not distant odds.
Yeah, and what happened here feels exceptional right up until you realize how many Canadian communities share the same basic ingredients. Drought, aging infrastructure, limited emergency capacity, interface housing, meaning like close together, right? Rail corridors, extreme heat, political fragmentation, and so many communities are right there, right? So then it stops feeling like this is a one-off tragedy, and it starts feeling like an early warning to the country that hasn't quite emotionally accepted that this is going to keep happening.
Yeah, it's like our focus is on the wrong things a lot of time.
Yeah.
I know for me, that is the story of my life. I'm a human being, and I tend to focus on a lot of things that really, in the end, make zero difference. Zero difference. Lytton is now working to become the first community in Canada to rebuild entirely to the most current fire-resistant construction standards. Whether that intention survives the financial and political pressures of the rebuild remains to be seen. What's not in question is the cost of getting it wrong. In 2021, Lytton burned in about 2 hours. The communications challenge, keeping fractured institutions and grieving people informed through the years of bureaucratic collapse, contested archaeology, and unanswered cause, and a rebuild that moved at a fraction of the pace anyone needed, that challenge is ongoing. Our guest for the next part of this episode has spent his career in exactly this kind of work. Tim Conrad is the founder of Butterfly Effect Communications, a BC-based firm that has led public information in some of Canada's worst disasters. He wasn't at Lytton, but we wanted to ask him if he had been, what would he have walked into? My gosh, look who it is. It's my good friend Tim Conrad. How about them apples?
How about them apples?
We've known each other for a long time, Tim.
I don't know when I haven't known you. So there you go.
Yeah, it's more than 40 years, which is crazy. Yeah. And you're in Kamloops right now.
I am in Kamloops in British Columbia, yes. But I've been across the country. I've lived in Ontario. Of course, grew up in Nova Scotia and then Alberta as well. So
I've already given a brief rundown of who you are and what you do, but if you wouldn't mind, can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so we are kind of masters of doom and gloom, and we try to bring calm to chaos. So we work with organizations like local governments and First Nations to prepare, practice, respond, and recover from things like issues, disasters, crisis, emergencies, the whole gamut. So in disasters, we'll often step in as public information officers for local governments or First Nations. And that role is to collect and distribute information. So all sorts of things are involved with that. And we want to have good, strong back and forth communications between audiences and organizations so everyone feels like they know what's going on and they kind of have an idea of why the decisions are being made the way they are.
It's interesting to me as somebody who doesn't do what you do. You wouldn't think that it was a thing.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we lead the process of getting all of the information out in disasters. So when you see an evacuation order alert, you see videos, you see a message on a sign, all of those things come from the types of people like us that are working in behind the scenes as information or communication officers.
So you go all over the place. I don't mean to go off too far off script, but you get called out to a place. And what are some of the places that you've been called to?
Yeah. So, in Western Canada, I was in the Southern Alberta floods. So I was in High River, and I also helped out with a couple other communities down there remotely. And then in recent years, the Caribou region of British Columbia, I've been with them quite a bit between 2017 and now for everything from fires to floods to landslides. They've kept me very busy. That's a very disaster affected area. And then the 2023 shoe swap wildfires is another one. So a big one that I think a lot of people would remember from recent times. So very challenging one that one was.
Yeah. I mean, here we are, we're talking about Lytton in this particular episode, and we're recording a bit ahead of when people are going to hear. So, I mean, just this morning, I read about a building being destroyed in the area because of a wildfire that's ongoing right now in Lytton, near Lytton.
Yeah. It's that time of year. We'll see more fire starting to pop up as the summer heats up. So July will definitely get what we call spicy in the business. It's looking like quite a spicy summer for, I'd say, about half of British Columbia. The lower half of British Columbia looks like it'll have quite a spicy summer. And we never know. It doesn't take much to, unfortunately, burn down a structure. Depends on where the fire starts and what the conditions are like, but it does happen, unfortunately.
Okay. So walk me through the first few hours of a response to a situation like the Lytton fire. So the fire's reported at 4:38 p.m. Evacuation order is at 6. Most of the people are gone from the town by 7:30. You get the call. Where do you start?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the biggest thing is that you're going to see community members as the first arriving responders, right? So there are people from the community or from a nearby community that are going to show up. So they're going to be thrown into those positions. And someone like me is going to be on that second wave that's going to come in and help out. So, but what I can tell you what it's like, having been there and done that, it is at a speed that is beyond anything you can imagine. Even for folks that have been, say, in an emergency world, I'm a former structural firefighter, and I was, kind of one of the faster paced emergencies we deal with is a motor vehicle collision. When you're dealing with that, it's a very, very high pace, very high stress, and we're moving very rapidly. Well, it's faster than that.
Wow.
And it's very, very chaotic. So you're ramping up all these systems, you're bringing in resources, you're really trying to collect as much information as you can, but also trying to make sense of it and put priority to it, which is really difficult to do. And so you've got to collect it, you've got to get it out there. You're getting out to your operational folks that are out in the front lines working, and you're also getting out to the public. So it's really crazy because you have no control and you have some control all at the same time. So it's really nuts.
It sounds pretty crazy. I mean, just, from the little things that I know when I was a junior firefighter in Bridgewater, I mean, we did participate in some things with the big boys. We didn't get to really fight the fires, but we saw the pace. We saw how quickly that happens. And just amazing the thought that has to go into a response and the planning that you have to do even before you respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's there is an incredible amount of planning that should happen and preparation prior to that. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And sometimes you're stuck into a position where you really don't have much to work with and you're piecing together the puzzle on the fly in that moment. And unfortunately, there are a lot of communities across Canada that have been caught off guard thinking that won't happen here.
Right.
And unfortunately, it certainly does.
So Lytton is pretty complex as far as government goes. There's 3 First Nations reserves, a regional district, the province, and the federal government all involved, and a 6-person municipal staff with no records, no experience running a recovery. So who speaks and how do you figure that out so quickly? Like, who are you talking to? Are you talking to everybody, or is there one central figure?
Yeah, this is the challenge, right? We have all these different bodies that come in and they are part of this response. And the way our systems work in Canada, we're not all that coordinated. We try as much as possible and we're getting better, but it is very challenging to get it all coordinated. So ultimately, though, the local government or the local First Nation is ultimately responsible to communicate in those moments. What you will have as well in British Columbia, we don't have counties, we have regional districts. So you'll have regional districts that'll be right around the communities, and they will have a responsibility. And then in a case of a fire, we have BC Wildfire. And so all of these different groups are communicating, not necessarily coordinated, which is unfortunate. And we continue to work on that. But it's a fight for the space and time to get messages out. The other weird thing that happens is we have all the media and all sorts of other attention that comes in from outside the community, and they want time with people that are speaking. And in some ways that's helpful, but in some ways it's not. So it's you do have this balancing act that you have to do at the time to make sure you're focused on getting information out to local people if they're in the local area at that time.
The people who are in danger, essentially.
Yeah, right?
Potentially.
Yeah, it's key for sure. Like you use media, but you use all the tools that you have in your toolbox to get information out.
So when people don't know if their neighbors made it out or when they can go home, or rumors just fly. I mean, that's the way it goes. How do you manage that when you genuinely don't have answers about what's going on?
Yeah, the rumor mill is one that you will, I've almost getting close to 30 years as a public relations practitioner, and I have yet to find someone that has managed to stop the rumor mill. They may say that they have, but they have not stopped it. One of my things that I like to do is just start to be part of the rumor mill. So getting our information into the mix, getting good information out there fairly regularly so that people can know what is going on. And ultimately, you have to determine, in the case of when there's loss of life or loss of property, you really focus on individuals in that case. You're not focused first on the wider masses and letting people know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
They're nosy.
Yeah, right. We're from Bridgewater. We know what nosy's like.
Right. And we will talk to those people eventually to the public, but the focus initially is on that individual. And so, you don't see that so much in all the other things that we do, but we do mass communications. But when it comes down to it, we'll actually do an individual phone call to people sometimes, or even in-person meeting in some cases.
So the province failed to bring First Nations into the recovery as genuine partners. Chief Matt Pascoe said the province made contact 12 hours after evacuations began, and only about cattle, not people. So how do you get that right?
It takes time, and it takes relationships and listening. So Lytton happened in a period where, after the 2017 fires in the Caribou region, a lot of the First Nations realized that things had to be done differently than that. And I was part of that response, and I agreed. I was on the other side of it doing it. And I didn't like the way in which we were communicating with First Nations, not really allowing them to have a part in the decisions. So that has shifted dramatically in British Columbia since 2017. So one of the big things that happens is we work together prior to come up with things like communications protocols, so that when something happens, there's a set process that's known between the First Nation and maybe the local government, maybe another First Nation. So there might be multiple parties involved.
Right.
And that if this happens, if we've got to do an evacuation or something, these are the steps that we're going to take. And this is how we're going to involve everyone through those steps. And so I was part of one. Actually, the first, as far as I know, the first use of one in Canada last September in the Caribou region went beautifully. It was a very smooth process. They were involved. They're in the room with us now as part of the Emergency Operations Center.
Good. Yeah.
And it went wonderfully. And everybody was involved. Everybody knew what was going on. We actually knew what our kind of next steps were too. If it went this way good or this way bad, we knew what we were going to do and kind of had things worked out prior to that. So there's ways to do it, but I think the biggest thing is we need time to listen. And one of the things that I've learned in my years of doing this type of work is that the education that we received when we were kids and even as adults was a lie. It's just plain and simple, it was a lie. And so we have to re-educate ourselves, and it's up to us to do that, not for Indigenous people to do that for us.
Right.
We have to re-educate ourselves and realize that some of the views that we have and why we get angry or do some of the things that we do in the way we do are built upon things that were lies. And so we've got to figure that out and drop those things from our way of doing. And we have that responsibility as non-Indigenous people.
Just doing this show, I have come across my own bias so many times in regard to Indigenous folks, and my views have been revolutionarily changed over the years from the beginning of Dark Poutine until now. I didn't understand, I just believed what I was told growing up. it is what it is. But yeah, we were lied to totally.
Yeah. I there was something actually that just happened in the last couple of weeks. I can't remember the exact thing it was, but something happened when somebody told me. I was in an Indigenous community and they told me something, and I was like, I've heard about this before. It took me a while to think about it. And I was like, yeah, we were taught this. This was a complete opposite of what they told me, right? And it was like, and here is the evidence right there. That they lied, like it was written down, but they covered it up. And so I think that's a big thing is like, if we just take time to spend time together, I think that's the amazing thing, because what I've noticed is animosity has been replaced with admiration. And we, when we put that evacuation order out last year, by the way, it was called the Scum Lake Alert. I love that name.
Okay.
And it was the Scum Lake Evacuation Alert. We were so happy. There was so much happiness over that hard work that had gone into getting to that point. And we were so happy with each other, right? So there was a lot of celebration in a really dark moment when it came down to it.
So the cause of the fire is still officially unknown. And so the TSB found nothing. The RCMP closed the file. A class action says it was a train. And how do you communicate for a community when the central question has no answer? And what's the posture for a large corporation on the other side of that question?
Yeah, right.
It's a big question.
And this has been an absolutely, ugly situation to watch around Lytton. So I am within the region which gets all the news for Lytton. So this is where the rumor mill really kind of got out of control right off the start while the fire was still burning. Yeah. And so I think back to one of the first wildfires I was involved in. We had a cause and we had suspects, but the problem is we lacked evidence to support any charges. So, and that was at the time fairly substantial fire. It burned down some homes, and so we were unsure what to say. And my recommendation at the time was like, we just be honest. We tell the truth. This is where we're at. We have some suspects in mind. We have charges that we can lay, but we do not have the evidence that we need. And we need the public to either come forward with the evidence, or unfortunately, we have to accept the result that we will have, which is that we will not have a determined cause that we can point to publicly on this. So
yeah, we can't go out with torches and pitchforks,
Exactly, right? So So it's tough. Everybody wants answers and accountability, but the truth is the most important out of that. And sometimes we're looking for things that are, people want to hear you say something that really isn't the truth. I sometimes say that to people. It's like, I can't say what you want to hear, right? So this becomes even more challenging with corporations. They struggle to speak with honesty.
Right.
Especially in a timely manner. And they definitely struggle with apologies. And I just wanted to point out, because in British Columbia, we have an apology law that you can give an apology and you won't get in trouble for giving an apology.
Right.
And so it's a good opportunity to flag that. And I hope that maybe some will take that to heart, and maybe some other places will get an apology law as well.
Because in other places, apologies can be very, very expensive at the end of the day. Yeah,
absolutely. Some parts of the world, it's definitely very expensive. But yeah, the big thing though, as we look at going forward, I've learned this from residents that have lost everything. There was one years ago that had literally lost everything: business, home, the whole everything. And they said to me, it's just all stuff. It's all things. And I cannot control what happened yesterday. I can't get mad at yesterday anymore, because it's what am I going to do? It's yesterday is gone. And so I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to focus on going forward. And as hard as that is to do, I find that people that do that find themselves in a much better place.
So by 2023, the village couldn't account for how tens of millions in recovery funds had been spent. An outside firm found it lacked leadership and governance capacity to manage such substantive and complex contracts. So what happens to communications when the recovery itself becomes the scandal?
Yeah, and this is here we are years out and still ongoing. Lytton is still in rebuild and still in recovery. Lytton is a lesson book. It's probably, and I hope nobody will destroy me for saying this, but it's probably the poster child for a brutal recovery. It's had a really, really rough go. And I don't think anybody could sit there and blame any one thing. It's been a mess of things off the start, and they've struggled in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They struggled to communicate. There was a period where a lot of the organizations went dark and said nothing at all for a while, which was a really bad trend to work off of.
Not helpful.
No, right? And the reality is that disasters love company. They love to destroy everything around them. If there's a relationship, if there's a process, anything that's near broken or it can break it, a disaster will do that. So the thing that we can do as communicators and in these moments is try to really focus on getting a good community connection and listening to what's going on in the community. The tricky part is getting leadership to then act on what people are saying to you. And because once you lose communications, you lose the community, right? Like that's what happens.
Definitely.
And unfortunately, trust is super low in governments all across Canada, all across the world.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll just be honest as far as I see it, governments suck at communicating.
Yeah.
They have a long ways to go, and people have been very adamant that they need to do a better job. You know, leaders have to start taking more advice from public relations professionals and folks that are in these frontline positions. That's key, because once you're listening to those people, you're listening to the community, and then you can get some alignment between your organization and the community. But yeah, it's tough when you have these scandals riding over everything and, money that's essentially gone missing without anything noticeable on a recovery.
Right.
It's very difficult. So it's good, strong decisions by those in leadership positions.
There was archaeological work that had to go on in Lytton to protect some Indigenous ancestral remains. And residents were furious about the delays, and the archaeologists faced hostility and racism on site. So, here's this Indigenous group that's left to justify it on their own. How do you handle that?
Yeah, so this is really tough, right? I'm sure that Lytton did not know that they were in this sort of situation prior to that moment. They were not prepared. They didn't know they were not prepared, and they didn't share that, of course.
Right, yeah.
Who thought an entire town on an archaeological site would burn down, right? It's just
right.
a very unusual situation. So, and if I can say it right, Inklakupma faced their own response at the same time. They say they were affected too. So their community had burned structures and people that had escaped the flames. So they had to do their own response, their own recovery, and then they're facing racism on top of that. So, and again, I come back to this re-education. We're getting angry at the people that are standing there when we should be yelling at some statue somewhere that signed a document a long time ago.
Sir John A. Macdonald, let's go yell at him for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. They're simply ensuring that those contracts are honored. But, think about it this way. People were frustrated with the fact that archaeological work had to happen. On the other side, were Indigenous people that were looking at a spot that used to be their community and their home had been buried. So, and it wasn't that long ago. We have to remember that too. There are pictures of some of these communities existing in these spots where now towns and villages and cities stand. So it's not that long ago. So it is something that has been passed down from a grandparent that they used to live there. And so they would like to know if there's still some of their history there, because it literally was just paved over and foundations put in. And so it's a tough thing to respect when you're trying to rebuild your home, though. And but I think if people can sit down and spend that time together, I think they'll come together.
It's all about connecting, as far as I can see. It's like it's like you say, listening to each other.
Absolutely,
we need to do more of that.
We sure do, right? It's so challenging. I'll just give you a good example. When I do the work I do, we get yelled at a lot, and as I'm usually the person that's on the camera, so my face is well known. And when I get out into the community, I usually get death threats pretty quickly. And
oh my! And
then people will come up and they'll yell, and I've been spit on, all sorts of different things. And but what I tell my team is like, we got to let that out. We got to let them have that and let that be free. Because hiding underneath that is a person that needs and wants to talk about something else. They have a frustration that they want to hear about. And so again, if we can take some time to sort of dig into some of that anger, it's amazing what I've been able to do with some people that I've had come up and give me a death threat. And by the end of it, we're shaking hands and I'm leaving with a hug, right? So it's there. It is there if we put the effort in.
Essentially, you just answered my next question. So I'm gonna ask you a few different parts of that. You've got your team with people coming at them and that kind of stuff. How do you look after yourself and your team after this sort of thing and during? What kind of things do you guys have to do for yourselves to ensure that you're not like too scared to go outside?
That's so true, actually. I've had that where I've been afraid to leave the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very real thing. The other thing that is hanging there is that I live with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I have other members on my team that have past trauma. So it's important for me to ensure that we bring our best with us. And sometimes we need to take a step away and give ourselves a break. So we check in with each other. One of the things we do first thing in the morning, we check in with each other as a group. And we do it throughout the day, and constantly we're communicating back and forth. My team, especially of my information officers, when I'm out there, I want to know if there's anything weird off with anybody. And we have good days and we have bad days, and that's normal. And unfortunately, when in an emergency, you get to keep going along with some of the bad days, and
sure,
you have to keep working. But some of the big things that we do is like we have a lot of fun. We do in the midst of these emergencies. And as I know, people are like, "Oh gosh, I can't believe you said that," but you have to. You have to keep your sanity. So we do things that make us laugh. Well, things that make us move. We dance. We have toys. We have treats. We have games. We make up names for random objects and try to outdo each other. There was the post of pain that we kept running into in the one emergency operations center. Like the pillar of pain.
Slam into it. Yeah,
right. And just. I've dressed up. I've done lots of weird little actions to get a good laugh. That we have to do all of that. But we also, one of the other things I've tried to do as much of is share the good stories, but also share some of the bad ones with our team, so that we know what we're doing it for. And we know who we're doing it for, and really, focus the heart in on that, and just realize that it is, yes, very difficult work, but we're doing it for a really, really good reason. So, and I think when we have ourselves focused on the good that will come out of all the horrific things that happen within a disaster, it really does help us to get through things.
Yep. I mean, it's how I approach this show. It's why I tell the types of stories that I do. It's that exact thing. The Auditor General says at least one of BC's 29 small municipalities will likely face a catastrophic event requiring provincial recovery support very soon, probably. What's the one thing a mayor or band councillor should do in the next 6 months to be ready?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to elected officials, I have a very pointed message I'll give them through this. But the biggest thing is get out of the way. Let managers and leaders do their job. And when we have an actual emergency, just like if it's a fire call or a paramedic event or police are responding, politicians don't have a place on the scene.
Right.
There's no role for them there in that moment. And we're seeing sometimes where politicians are getting in the way and trying to be part of the response and getting in there. Step back, step out of the room, get out of the room, and look at how you can connect your community with the resources that are going to be needed through the response and recovery process. That is an extremely important role for elected officials. So look at the tools that your leaders and your managers are going to need. Find out what they are, get the funding for them and the support for them to make them happen, and then get out of the way and trust them to do their job. We do so much work in a very tight environment, and we work together often outside of typical disasters. So, what we need from people is to fall into your role in those moments. And for an elected official, we need them to fall into their role outside of the room and go out there and start working the relationships with the other levels of government down to your community and connecting those things. And of course, working with your operations team.
So you gave me a final question, which I think is actually awesome. But what's the one thing our audience, the rest of us, could do to be ready?
Yeah. This is my favorite question. I always make sure I give at least one of these nuggets when I'm doing any sort of talk like this. So we all have an individual responsibility to be prepared. That is so key. It is not up to others to come and be our responders in that your first little bit. So it is up to you to get yourself out of your home and get yourself down the road to a safe location. So think about what that looks like. What's your plan look like, and how what steps would you go through? And what would happen if your family split up? They're at work or they're at school. And do they know what the plan is and how you would?
Do you have a rally point or something?
Right?
Yeah.
So I have a couple spots you can go. And I'm going to give you 2 here because the other one is to just get outside. Like people they'll have a lot of anxiety and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know. Get outside, get in your yard, clean up the debris that's around your yard. There's always lots of dry stuff laying around up against your house, up against any structure. If you've got wood, piles of wood or anything like that, get them away from structures, move them away, and get rid of bark mulch. Bark mulch is very bad. We don't want that. Bark mulch is super bad. It's like a lightning rod through stuff. Like it just comes right up through the house and burns your house down like crazy. So
yeah.
But yeah, any step that you can take, small or large, will turn anxiety into action, right? So, and that's a little saying that a resident gave me a bunch of years ago. And so if you've got a little anxiety, get out, take some action, and you're going to feel a lot better overall.
Awesome. Well, Tim, you should tell everybody about your own podcast while you're here.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I do a podcast called the Wildfires, Floods, and Chaos Communications Podcast, and we focus on the people in the business that do this type of work, and we talk to all sorts of different people. But I've got lots of neat guests on there, and I've had just recently spoke to the publisher of the Tumblr Ridgeline News about the school shooting up there. But I've talked to firefighters and talked to First Nations and all sorts of different people. And I'm constantly looking for new guests and even residents to speak to talk about all those things that we experience when we go through crisis and chaos.
And where can people find you? What's your web address?
Yeah, so you can find us at communicationspodcast.com. So communications with an S, podcast.com. And be happy to have you jump over and listen to an episode.
Well, I think I'll do that. I've done that anyway. So
yeah. And of course you can watch an episode too. So we do have some video episodes up there as well. But no, Mike, you've been great. You've been great to lean on as I've got my podcast started. So I really appreciate that. And you've been a great friend for that.
Well, anytime. We've known each other for 100 years and our parents end up living in the same building. So
yeah, right. Just down the hall, up the stairs.
Bizarre. Small world, right. Whatever.
It is a small world. Yeah.
Groovy.
Awesome, Mike.
Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Excellent. And let me tell you, when you're doing this kind of work, it definitely makes you poop in your toque now and then.
Oh, definitely it does. Oh, that was great. And thank you to my buddy, Tim Conrad. And that is it for Dark Poutine episode 426, Wildfire, the Day Lytton Burned. Stay tuned for Matthew and I and more chit-chat.
That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
And we don't have any voicemails this week. Please call us. I feel lonely. Matthew, do you feel lonely?
I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Matthew doesn't feel lonely, but I do. Yeah. Well, there is that. There is that. I don't feel that. I don't feel that kind of lonely. I just feel unloved by our listeners. As I've talked about, the rejection-sensitive dysphoria. When nobody calls in or there are no patrons or anything like that, I feel really badly.
You and your syndromes.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay, just to pull the curtain back a bit, if you've called and you haven't heard your voicemail yet, it's because we've recorded ahead so Matthew could have the month of August off. So yes, please keep calling. Please keep leaving voicemails. We love you, and you'll hear them soon. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. And as I mentioned, we don't have any patrons or donut money donors this week. Oh, boy.
Come on, people. Not just because Mike's sensitive. Let's go. Keep chatting to us. Keep the show going. Send us just a few bucks. Just imagine just one day of Starbucks a week could keep the show going.
One day of Starbucks a week could keep the show going. It actually, honestly, If everybody in the Yumber Yard gave $1 a month,
it'd be great. Like
literally
$1 per person, right?
Per person, per month, we would be doing just fine. But we don't have that. And I mean, some people can't afford $1 a month. Some people literally cannot afford that.
Believe me, with my partner out of work right now, I understand that.
Yeah. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or Interac using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that is it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be
a bad egg.
Don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple. Bad egg. Anyway, bad eggs are bad too.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.